embracing equity, which is to cultivate the mindsets and practices necessary to create an affirming. I think that's probably the most important word here, especially for our children, affirming, inclusive and equitable education ecosystem with the vision of having a just society where all children are affirmed. There's that word again, in their whole humanity and nurtured to their fullest potential. With embracing equity, I am a facilitator, and also I am involved in the leadership presidency, which is helping us to be more mindful, especially amongst our staff and with our parents and in our communities, about how we bring anti-racism and that consciousness about anti-racism into our communities. And as Indigenous communities, we also have to be mindful of the ways that we have internalized racism, have internalized anti-Blackness, how we have internalized sometimes that need to be in proximity and close to white supremacy, because that is, like, I guess, considered in a very odd way prestige, but that is exactly what has hurt our communities in so many ways. So really shifting that idea of a damage-centered narrative to that strength-based, asset-based narrative. And so I live here in my village of Gihua. I'm also from Cochiti Pueblo and Okeawenge Pueblo. And if you see me going like this, like, yeah, I like to dance, but I'm really shooing the flies away too. So a lot of flies, sorry, can't help it. Res life. Okay, so let's see where we're at. Okay, yeah. So nature kuetsi say hopa kutre jash kusha hopa show ashits nature hopa hawa kita kunushetsi. Mani kupers te mashaki. Jewish and you pake our studies a shamit in the test is just it was katritini dia kohan katritini ha o satstiasa shami sanuashta suchus gua shami nuasumristia suchus as a chat suchus a watch chat hanitash suchus oja ahead as a nashat tia suchus gu rawa sanikat suchus gu a hek sucha nash sucha papa you a cut gu a chat hamatza at a shami nyashtra suchus han gu isuta a hot stick. And so I greet you in my language of Keres, and always recognizing our ancestors and the gifts that they give us, but also to ask for guidance, because we believe that we don't ever do anything alone, that we do it with the guidance and with the light of our ancestors, of our spirits, but also with the guidance and the light and the support of our families. So I just want to acknowledge our families, our family living and non-living, but really just the support of my own daughters, my husband, my mom, my aunt. And I also want to acknowledge, and please excuse me if I don't acknowledge you, but all the Indigenous people that are on this call and on this video conference. So there's a lot of you, which I'm really happy to see. And if you could just chat your name again in the box so people know who you are. But that I saw is Wilhelmina, Monica, Diane, Winnie Ann, Helen, Esther, Mr. Nastasio, Giovanna, Sunshine, Chalakusi, and I think there was a few more, but I really appreciate it if you could drop your name in the chat box so people at least can see your name. So I'm gonna go ahead and go, and even though this call is, this is online, I'm still nervous, and but I'm happy that I have the gift of being able to share with you all today. So I want everybody to go ahead and take a deep breath with me. Let's take 4. The magic number is 4. So let's do our first one, and just go ahead and close your eyes and just take a deep breath, and you can count the breaths yourself, but we'll start with the first one. And there's my fourth breath. And I just that finds that helps to recenter. Thank you for those of you who have shared in the chat. I really appreciate that. I started off with the music by Black Lodge singers. My people are considered Pueblo people, and we don't do powwow. That's not our way, but I certainly have an appreciation for it. And that powwow group, it's not really a band. It's called the Black. I think they're Black Lodge singers, but I always love that song because it's a take on it's called Kids Powwow Songs, but I always love the one about Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse is an interesting figure. So anyway, so my journey with indigenizing educating started off with our two daughters, and our two daughters we have right here is the oldest is Akurit and the youngest is Haatit. So April and May are Persliana April and Persingula May. Persliana Akuditz is our oldest child. She's 16 and her first language is Coach Chikeris. And so today in talking about indigenizing education, we first want you to just to visit with one another. And we want you to share with each other your name, the organization that you represent, and then we want you to answer the question, what do you know about indigenizing education, or what concept do you have of that? And I've been really intentional about trying to put pictures of Indigenous children all up and down Google Slides. And this first picture is of my niece, Autumn, and then her nephew, which is my great nephew, little Austin. And so when you go into these breakout rooms, hopefully there will only be 3 or 4 of you, but if you can share with enough time to answer the question, indigenizing education. And remember that we want to be disrupting that white supremacy culture characteristic of perfection. So it's okay not to know, or it's okay to know a little bit. It's okay to know a lot, but none of us is perfect. Remember that being perfect is a false construct that has been given to us by whiteness and white supremacy, and we really want to work to disrupt that, especially in our indigenous communities, our communities of color. So go ahead, Rashi, please. So I wanted to say thank you to Mr. Nastasio. For us in the Southwest, we're always, many of us see each other a lot in these meetings, and all actively working to revitalize our languages. But one of the main messages that our children receive in school, not just here in the Southwest, but all over, is this cartoon written by Ricardo Cate, who his cartoons are in the Santa Fe New Mexican every day. And it's this idea, it's not an idea, it's a real thing. It's I will not act Indigenous class. And a long time ago in the 80s, that was a thing for people to do. And even before that, where teachers would punish children. And so I think it's funny and it's not funny, because early on, this child looks like, they're standing on a stool, really small, but early on our children receive the message that it's not okay to be their indigenous selves, who they are, who they come to school with every day. And our children shouldn't feel like that. And that is one of the goals also of embracing equity, is to allow our children to realize their whole selves. And so again, going back to my own daughter, one of the things I wanted for her most was to be able to be fluent in our language at 2.5 years old, and she was. And so when it came to what early childhood setting I would send her to continue her fluency, all the early childhood settings in our area, we have Head Starts in our villages, and it just shows you the power of white supremacy and Western education. It's steeped, of course, in white supremacy, and this idea of English, and that you will be successful if your child learns English. And what I learned early on is that, yeah, maybe I did speak English. Maybe English was my first language, but I recognized right away in the ways that I was not successful, in the ways where I didn't feel good about myself because I didn't speak my own tribal language. My parents were from two different villages, and I lost my father when I was 4, and so I was raised in Giwa and Coachti with my mom and my aunt and uncle and my grandparents, and eventually learned that language. But I realized early on that our children, they need both languages. They need their tribal languages, and culture. Maybe their language is, in a fragile state now where it's hard to get it back, but there are many tribes that still have a chance at reclaiming their language, revitalizing their language. To the next slide, please. So I don't want to elaborate too much on this, but this article just came out the other day, and it's all students need anti-racism education, especially white children, especially children who have internalized the idea that our proximity to whiteness will give us more privilege, and yet what we need for especially our BIPOC children and our Indigenous children is our children should not have to go to school and learn English or learn that way of being without giving up who they are themselves. And if you want to read this article, I think they might have already put it in the chat. So the next slide is settler colonialism. And I think when we talk about indigenizing education, I think first we want to indigenize education for our own children. We want to indigenize education so that our children feel affirmed and they can feel their whole selves, that they feel good about themselves. But we also want to be able to indigenize education for non-Indigenous children, non-Native children, no matter what background, no matter what race they are, because we all are living in a society that is a settler colonial society. And so we can begin by defining settler colonialism as it relates specifically to Indigenous peoples of North America. The goal of settler colonization is the removal and erasure of Indigenous peoples in order to take the land for use by settlers in perpetuity. According to Laura Hurwitz and Sean Borges' Settler Colonialism Primer, this means that settler colonialism is not just a vicious thing of the past, such as the gold rush, but exists as long as settlers are living on appropriated land and thus exist today. Hence, that push to erase us. Hence, that push to always not acknowledge our existence, but in continuing to erase this and not to acknowledge our existence is continuing to marginalize our children, and then becomes that dehumanization of our children, of our people. And it, unfortunately to this day, our children still have some of the worst education outcomes, and that shouldn't be like that any longer. We know enough, we know better. The research is there that shows that our language and our culture serve as protective factors, and our children deserve to thrive. And so I put the pictures. These are children from the Pueblos, mostly young girls in 1884, and these children were taken to Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And then they were made to, of course, cut their hair. This is the after picture. And shed and their clothing. And I just think a lot of these girls are probably less than 8 years old. But if you can imagine any child in your life being taken from their families in that way, the first thing that they went for in boarding schools was the language. And so we are still reeling from the trauma of being taken to boarding schools in all Indigenous communities that our great-grandparents or our grandparents had to experience. And that's like another whole workshop in itself, but we can go to the next slide. And before I talk about about racism, we really need to then, in indigenizing education, we need to think about creating an education that no longer erases Indigenous people and Indigenous children. And so erasure is racism. And so so that we all have the same working vocabulary. I'm using the definitions from Tiffany Jewell's book this book is Anti-Racist. And racism is personal prejudice and bias and the systemic misuse and abuse of power by institutions. Anti-racism is actively working against racism. It is making a commitment to resisting unjust laws, policies, and racist attitudes. And it is a way acknowledging how we can be anti-racist, how we get free from centuries in a racialized society that keeps us separate and oppressed. And so in Indigenizing education,
no power, nothing. Really? Yeah. Wonder why?
Okay.
Sorry, we couldn't hear you. It was breaking up because someone's talking.
Okay, so in indigenizing education, one of the first things that people, I'm just gonna give an example. One of the first things that, and I'll just talk from our own experience at Coach T in revitalizing our language when we started that 25 years ago. They told us to think about songs, and one of the first things that somebody wanted to do was like, oh, we'll sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in Keras. That is not indigenizing education. That is basically using our language in service to the English language. And that is not what we want to do. What we needed to do was to think and remember the songs that we used to sing to our children before English became so powerful in our communities. So I just wanted to give that example. But some of you probably have already figured this out, but what I'm doing is a KWL. And so the next part of a KWL is, what do you want to know? So in your breakout room, you're going to be put with different people again, and I want you to be able to share, again, your name and your school, and then what's something else that you want to know more in terms of indigenizing education. And then the child that I have in this picture is my sister's son, her oldest son, and my other sister. And this is in my mom's backyard, and he planted corn and squash. So this is the one pumpkin that made it through a heat wave that we had. And so I wanted to share that picture with you. But I think I love the way Daisy always says this, visibilizing our children. And so I'll say a little bit more about this picture when we come back, but we're gonna go ahead and go to breakout rooms again. Thank you. Our own people and our own children, the more, again, like I love Daisy's word, it visibilizes who we are. And for me personally, I'm very conscious of that idea of being like being performative. Like if I am going to wear like our traditional clothing, I'm gonna wear my traditional clothing because we're doing it for us, not to prove to somebody that I'm from this tribe and I really am Indian, and to meet their stereotype. I'm gonna do it, in service to us and our needs and our people. And then with that, this is a picture of my mom. And this is my mom. I don't know if she got on. Oh, she got on. She was supposed to get on. Mom, are you on? My mom just retired from Santa Fe Indian School, and she taught there for a very long time, like when it was still in Albuquerque. Indian School there. She's a history teacher. I'm so really proud of her. But these are the second to the tallest is our oldest daughter, and then our middle one is in the middle. I mean, our second one is in the middle. But my sister has six beautiful children, and the youngest one is not a baby anymore. She's sitting right there, but she is 8 years old, and she actually just got accepted to Cares Children's Learning Center, and she's been wanting to come there. My nephew, who's the second to the last, went there for the first 5 years. But our children deserve to realize their whole selves. They deserve to be able to participate in modern contemporary society, but they also deserve to have that connection and to know who they are as Coach T people, as Giwa people, as Duzuni children and San Felipe children and Navajo children. They all deserve to be who they are, not to be constantly pushed toward assimilation. So we can go to the next slide. So not be constantly pushed towards assimilation. They need to know, their histories, their languages, our cultures, and what our purpose in life is as a people, at whatever tribe we are from. So this is a picture of my grandma and my grandpa and my mom. And I heard my mom is on. Hi, Mom. And this is my mom. And this is me when I was 18 years old. And this is them dropping me off at Stanford University in the fall of 1992. And one of the things that my grandpa said to me, and just was always very supportive, like I grew up with my grandparents. My grandma is Coach T, and my grandfather is from Kiwa. My mom lives in Coach T Pueblo. But my grandpa just, he said that, and he said this in Karis, and he said, huro tia ha nusu mishu rahaik amidinyo gyumshu tidi out, tino gyumit shoku no gyumishu ni ku ahin sewatse tatsni sustra shewachin. And that, what he was telling me is, I know you're going to go to school. I'm dropping you off here at school, but you must remember that our language and our life ways and our way of being in life is just as important as the education that you are, coming to Stanford for. And so that has always stuck in my mind, of course, with how they raised me and helping my mom raise me, but always in my consciousness that we have to absolutely create an education and indigenize that education so that our children, again, know who they are and know who we are as a people, and again, not learn English at the expense of losing our own languages. So at this moment, this is in September 1992, I gave them big hugs, and I could still see my grandma waving to me in our rental car that they dropped me off in. And I'm just always really grateful that, my mom was so lucky to have the parents that she has, which in turn also made her a really beautiful person. So I'm really grateful for my grandparents. And so, Wilhelmina, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the case. And so I don't mean to put you on the spot, Wilhelmina, but this is Wilhelmina Yazi and her son Xavier. And she and her brave self and her community brought a lawsuit against the state of New Mexico. And basically that lawsuit, and it ruled in her favor and in the Martinez favor, said that the Native American children from under-resourced communities, English language learners, and children with special needs were not receiving an adequate education. And the court ruled in her favor, and Judge Singleton said indeed that New Mexico was not providing an adequate education. And so, Wilhelmina, feel no pressure, but I wanted to ask you if you want to say anything else or add anything else. I know the YouTube video is here if anybody wants to see it, but can we unmute Wilhelmina and see if she says yes or no?
Hi, Tricia.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Tricia. You're so beautiful. Every time this comes up, I get emotional because it's such a big thing and a big deal for our Indigenous children. So sorry if I get all emotional here. However, again, Tricia, thank you. So we brought this case forth. For me, you know, of all the things that our children endured in the public school system, and gosh, it's been quite a while, but at the end, you know, we won. And as Tricia was talking about, you know, just bringing forth that culturally relevant curriculum into our school system, it's so important that our children, our Indigenous children, really learn who they are, where they come from, you know, that gives them motivation to excel, and that they are just as capable as any other children in the country, that we just want them to be looked upon equally. And also for our non-Indigenous people to really learn who they are and to stop with the stereotyping and, you know, all these things that come along with it. I know we could go on and on and on, but I'll try to share some resources on the chat just to give you a background and an understanding of the case. There's so much to it. So, but again, Tricia, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. And I just think what Wilhelmina done and what this state lawsuit is probably on par with like Brown versus the Board of Education, like those major lawsuits with regard to education. And so we are really honored to have her on this call. And anytime you get a chance, if you just can send prayers and courage and strength her way, because I'm sure what she embarked on probably wasn't an easy thing to do, but it is her destiny in life and that purpose that we believe that we're all tasked with, and that she had the courage to follow through with it. So I'm really grateful for her, and she has inspired the state of New Mexico to make that change that is needed for our Indigenous children. So can we go to the next slide, please? So with Indigenous education, for me, I just want to acknowledge the time that we have about 33 minutes. So I'm going to try to zoom through these next slides. But for me, Indigenizing education started with language and started with our daughters. So language is our connection to our past and our ancestors and our connection to our purpose and our future. And so I'm gonna bring my mom on. Mom, if you can unmute yourself, and I want her just to share maybe one memory, Mom, about Percy. But this is this is me. I almost said that was my daughter. This is me and my great grandma. So this is me and my great grandma, my mom's grandma. And then this is our daughter, Persiliana. But my great grandma, her name was Persiliana. So our Persiliana was named after the original powerful Persiliana. And Persiliana, her and her sisters were orphaned. They went to St. Catherine's boarding school in Santa Fe. And when she met our great grandpa, who was Coach T, she married him and moved to Coach T, and there was no way she was leaving her sisters behind. So she took all her sisters with her to Coach T Pueblo, and hence we have a huge family at Coach T. And then this is my grandma. This is my mom's mom. But Mom, do you want to say anything?
Good morning, everyone. This is Katayat Goetzi Hopa, Green Up Me, Eke Trapastia. To all the educators on here, I'm just so impressed with your persistence to participate in something like this so you can learn more, so your students can learn more. But the memory I was going to share with you all, with my grandmother Percy, is this very same memory Trisha shared. My grandmother got orphaned during the Spanish flu. And like she said, they were orphaned, sent to a boarding school, and being the oldest, married and brought all her sisters to the next tribe down the river. But all I can say is my grandmother Percy was very resilient. She had to be. Her first language was Tewa. Her second language was Spanish. Her third language was Keres. Then her fourth language was English because of the need to survive and communicate in the community she was involved with. Culturally, for economic reasons, she was a strong woman, as well as my mother, who carried on the same persistence for being culturally resilient. And so that's what I wanted to share with all of you. Nature.
The nature mom. So in the next slide, you'll see Karish Children's Learning Center. And Karish Children's Learning Center was again born out of the need for my own daughter to have an early childhood setting that would honor her language, that would honor who she was. And even though she didn't get to attend Karish Children's Learning Center, she was the legacy. Her and our other daughter were the legacy for it. And so I always tell them that if they weren't born, this school in the way it exists now wouldn't be there. And I'm always really grateful for all the founders, our partnership with Coach T Tribal Council, and then the founding board and everybody that helped with it. And so on the next slide, you'll see that for me, again, indigenizing education started with our language. And our language, everybody talks about like, oh, what kind of curriculum should we use? We don't need a curriculum. We don't need somebody's curriculum from the outside. The curriculum that we have and need is, oh my gosh, there's my aunt. There's my other mom. She's in the background, my Aunt Jen. Hi, Mom. And so the culture is, our indigenous knowledge systems are all embedded in our language. And so that's where we pull from. That's what we decide to teach our children. And so at KCLC, it's intergenerational. And then in our elementary classroom, so many people worry like, oh, our kids are not going to learn English, or they need to learn English. But we have dual language, and the possibilities that dual language provides, are endless. But the main possibility it provides is that our children, again, can still learn English, sustain English without losing who they are, without losing their own language. But indigenizing also involves, building community, which so many tribes, that's the essence of our tribes, is is building community. And then of course we use the Montessori method to perpetuate that. And then this picture right here to the left is one of our young boys in our elementary, and he's was doing research on all the pueblos. So he's drawing the symbol for Laguna. He was reading about it, and this project probably took him about 2 months, but he ended up with a book on all the 19 pueblos. And then again, providing what our languages do is connect us back to the land. And so this is a picture of our older elementary students just looking at the sunflowers that were growing down by the river. And then one of our elders, elders wanted to take the children to show them where they would go hunt for mushrooms, especially the big mushrooms. And that was the area that we had gone to last September. But indigenizing for us really starts with our language. And again, I want to also be sensitive. Like, I know there are a lot of languages, and we can go to the next slide, that are in a fragile state. But for those of us who still have a fighting chance at revitalizing and re-strengthening our languages, that's what we're doing. And I just want to just really quick say about culturally sustaining pedagogy and the work that I first heard about this from Lorena and Roberto Herman. I think they were presenting at this conference. Is hold on. Just that, like, I didn't know what I was doing in 2006. I didn't know what I was doing was anti-racist. I didn't know that what I was doing was culturally sustaining pedagogy. So we just need to have that awareness that even though something might not state that it's anti-racist, that it doesn't mean that it's not. So we can't not allow that to continue to make us invisible. But also a lot of people are using BIPOC, and yet not even including Indigenous educators in the conversation, much less acknowledging Indigenous people. And I'm like, well, why are they saying BIPOC, and then they're still like erasing us? So really being conscious of the way settler colonialism is so insidious, and how we've internalized it even as BIPOC people. We just have to be just conscious of that. But Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy is an amazing book if you ever get a chance to read through that book. And so common, we need common, just remembering what colonization is. Like, we need to know what colonization is so that we remember what we are decolonizing from. And it's everyone's job to colonize if we're going to have any chance of survival on this planet. So colonization refers to both the formal and informal methods that maintain the subjugation and or exploitation of Indigenous people, land, and resources. And that's from Michael Yellowbird of For Indigenous Minds Only. And these are our two daughters when they were small. We can go to the next slide. And so as we are decolonizing, we must also create space for indigenizing. Like, you have to continue to strengthen, we have to continue to strengthen the classroom for Indigenous children, but also for non-Indigenous children, because they're in so many ways, they're going to have to take responsibility for their ancestors of what they did. And we have to coexist, but how can we do so in a way that's truthful, that offers justice and reconciliation to especially Indigenous communities and Black communities. So indigenizing allows us to continue to strengthen our own lifeways, languages, communities in service to our ancestors, our lands, our people, our children, our descendants, and allows a pathway back to wholeness as the original peoples of this land. So Jody Archambault, her and I, that's Dave Archambault's daughter, I love the way she said it. She said, we will always have to interface with the contemporary, the modern, and the other. And that doesn't make us any less Indigenous. It doesn't make us any less Native or less Indian. But when we're conscious of strengthen our indigeneity, it just makes us that much stronger, and it makes our children that much stronger. So what are some concrete actions that we can do? And one of the things that we can do very early on in our classrooms, even in our early childhood classrooms, is as teachers subscribe to Erin Capella's Tribal Nation Maps, and that gives you all the information about whose original homelands are, but it also gives, like, if you look at the map now, where those tribes might have been relocated to. But simply saying, when you say you are from, saying on the territory of the unceded lands of the such and such people, before you say the state or the city or the place that you reside. And when you say that every day, then that's going to start to get not only in our consciousness, but our children's consciousness. use curriculum written by Indigenous people. If you look at my website, www.indigenouscheerleader.com, there's a resource pages, and I think Miss Warito, I know you're on the video, but she did a beautiful curriculum there on Wampanoag. That's on there. That link is on there. Maybe if you can put it in the chat box, Miss Warito. She's from Oklahoma. And then my mom's working on curriculum right now with the Museum of New Mexico, the Indian Public Cultural Center, Montana, Time Immemorial in Washington. Use curriculum written by Indigenous people. And if you choose to use teachers, paid teachers, be mindful of the ways in which they make us out to just be cartoons. And that's just, remember, that's another form of dehumanizing our children, dehumanizing our people. As much as you can, show contemporary Indigenous children and people. Bring in people to share their lived experiences. If you're in an urban area, seek out Indigenous communities at the university or local American Indian centers. In the 50s was the Relocation Act, and because of that, a lot of Native American centers like Santa Fe, Albuquerque, San Francisco, Oakland, LA, all over the place, Washington, New York City and Manhattan. There's one downtown, not down there by Kmart. I don't remember what street that was. Astor Place, I think, all over. And then always being mindful of the white gaze, Indigenous or not. Like, even we have to teach our children about the white gaze and how we're always expected to perform and meet their expectations of what a Native is versus like them seeing us and recognizing history and what that has done to us as a people. Next slide, please. And so remembrance, I love this picture. We have to remember that Indigenous children and people's lives are literally at stake, that education outcomes, even though we don't want it like that, do translate to life outcomes. And that this is that famous picture of Carlisle. And you see it's all black and white, and just now the hope that the color is starting to come back. And there's so much happening in Indian country right now that we're so hopeful, that gives us so much hope, especially the Indigenous education movement, where there are so many language immersion schools. Again, if you go to my website, you'll see them listed. Or not just schools, but cultural revival schools, and then of course classrooms, all the amazing work that Indigenous educators are doing right now. So this next breakout, we want you to share perhaps something. Next slide, please. So with Indigenous education, I want to say this in a humble way, because I don't want to assume that you've learned something, but maybe what has struck you, or maybe what has been a takeaway. And again, my hope to share our Indigenous children as much as we can. This is one of our godchildren, and our godchild is Mississippi Choctaw, Black, Cuban, and Honduran. His parents are literally rocket scientists. His mom is a PhD in mechanical engineering. She's Mississippi Choctaw and Black, and works in Huntsville, Alabama at, it's not JPL, I think it's APL. And his dad is a biologist. And I love this picture of him looking at the white flowers. And I just want to say real quick, we recognize that our godson is Black presenting. And so his mom and dad have already had to start having the conversation with him about what that might mean for him as he grows older, and what I've learned about that, how we have to protect Black boys and Black girls, Black presenting boys, Black presenting girls too. And see them and grow them in their full humanity and protect them as well. So we're going to go ahead and break out, and then we'll be ending after that. We found her after 2 weeks in Montana. She was a sibling of 5 children, and of 5 children, there's only 1 child left Her own sister, Zoe, committed suicide at 11 years old. Her other sister was hit in a hit and run. Her brother was shot 18 times, and it says it right there. This is from a Facebook. Her brother was shot 18 times by the Billings police, and then, of course, unfortunately, with her, she passed away. And then this this list that she likes to do, one of the things she was looking forward to was to go be by her brother. But just that the missing and murdered that is happening in all over the United States. But I always don't, although we need to be aware of that, we also need to focus on the living and the children that we do have, and how do we keep what happened to her and her siblings happening to any more of our children. So if Rashi or Daisy, if you can put the link to there's an article that if you want to read more about that, it's a really, really informative article that was written about her life. But I just wanted to share her handwriting and one of just what she said about her grandma. And she said, my grandma always told me growing up, when your life is falling apart or you're at your lowest, just ride. And just the way that grandmas and grandpas provide so much protection and love for their grandchildren. And I see that with my own mom and the way she gives love and protection to her grandchildren, and to my aunt, the way she loves and protects her grandchildren, and just how important grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles are in our culture as well. I want to highlight on the next slide. So anti-racism conversations must happen inclusive of Indigenous children and educators. Otherwise, it is not anti-racist. So anytime you see a panel on education, on anything, and any other race, every other race is included except ours. Please question why. Please ask why we're not included. There's enough Indigenous educators out there that there's no reason why we shouldn't be in those conversations. And our children deserve to thrive and have full lives, a life where systemic racism in education does not hold them back, but is reimagined to drive them towards liberation and who they are meant to be in this world. I love this picture of our nieces playing volleyball. This is at my aunt's, my grandma's house, and they're all still wearing their dresses. Some of them still have their moccasins on, but they're out there playing volleyball. So they went from doing what we were doing, and then we were done, and they went to go play outside. And this is one of our godchildren, who's part Kiowa, and then her cousins for some of their dances in Oklahoma. And the next slide, if you're able to join CARE's Children's Learning Center, it's going to be our 5th annual Native Language Symposium. And if we can share that slide. And the focus on that, and this happened even before all the George, with unfortunately what happened with George Floyd. This is focusing anti-bias, anti-racist education for Indigenous children. And Wilhelmina, who was on this call, on this video, she's a keynote speaker along with Tiffany Jewell, who wrote the book. This book is Anti-Racist, Due to Flying Earth, who's the principal of Native American Community Academy. And all the schools panels are schools that focus on social justice. And so if you know of anybody who is interested in the Embracing Equity Leadership Residency, I'm going to encourage all the Indigenous people on this call, educators, to look into that. It's an amazing leadership residency. And if you get a chance, think about joining it. I want to thank everybody for being here and just remembering our calls to action and to stay connected. And you can, Embracing Equity offers cohorts, and I believe most of their cohorts are sold out, but you can always sign up for the next one. I think they're going already into their spring wait list. And just to remember that building stamina with embracing equity, to try to find an accountability buddy, and remember to take one thing that you learned from today's session and post it on your social media. And we always love this quote by Angela Davis. And the quote says, I need to widen mine. It is, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And if you get a chance, we're asking you to give feedback. And before you go and give your feedback, if everybody could just go ahead and stretch their arms out, up, and take a deep breath in. And exhale, and give yourself a big hug. And then give somebody a virtual hug. Unmute yourself and say, I am hugging, and say their name, please.
I am
hugging them.
so much, Trisha.
Hugging Betsy.
Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm hugging Esther.
And if
before you sign off, it would be great if you, just a couple of things. We put in the chat box the application for the leadership residency. You can also join our cohorts. We'll put the link for the wait list in the chat box as well. And again, we really, really, really need your feedback on this session. So Sharon will put the link from this Mentimeter. Again, it should not take more than 2 minutes, but please complete the quick form.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And please, fill out the feedback. And thank you to all the Indigenous people, my mom, Mr. Anastasio, everybody, all of you that were here. Have a good day.